This lesson is on for loops, rounding, and random numbers. We're going to start off with looking at for loops. They're similar to while loops in the way that they can do similar things. They're structured a bit differently, and after you get to know them, you'll find that for loops might be your preferred way to do certain types of loops. They can be quicker to set up than while loops in some situations. So, especially in counting tasks, for loops can be easier than while loops, especially if you know the starting points and the ending points where you want to go. So let's say that you wanted to have a loop that went around exactly 100 times. You wanted to go from 400 to 499, and you could state that in a for loop. So let's look at the syntax, and then I'll show you an example. So this Google Drive document will be available to you in the online learning platform that we have, D2L. So the for loop starts off with the word for, and then we state a variable name. So we're going to state a variable name, and that variable name will be known as the counter variable. That's the same variable in the while loop. If we were to take the while loop as a comparison, the count variable or the C variable in the while loop that started off at a value and changed every time the loop went around. That's the variable here in the for loop as well. Then we have the words in range, and in brackets we state the starting value, a comma, and then the exit value. The exit value is the value under which the for loop will stop if the variable reaches that value. And it exits it right away as soon as it sees that value. We won't talk about the optional counting rule yet. And we have a colon, just like in a while loop, at the end of the for loop line. And finally, everything inside of the for loop is tabbed in for the for loop body. So let's look at an example in Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio. I'll create a new document. So in Python, I'm going to go new file plus, and I'll call it forloops.py. So here, I'm just going to say forloops.py as my first line, and here's how we make our for loop. We're going to start with the word for, and then the counter variable name. I'll use C will be often used, kind of an abstract name, but whenever you see the variable C, you can assume the letter C that it's a counter. In range, bracket, and there's two brackets there, and you can see that Visual Studio Code gives us a hint. Well, it was, let's see, range, there. It'll tell you when it wants to stop at, but we usually also put the starting in as well. So I'm going to say start at 0 and go until you reach 10. And I'm going to put a colon at the end. When I press enter, it automatically tabs in, and I'll put print C. When we run this program, we'll see that it prints out all the values from 0 to 9. So remember I said that as soon as it sees the exit condition 10, it stops without executing the body of the for loop. And that's a really important point. I'm going to go back to my margin for my next line, and I'm going to just print a bunch of stars on the screen so you know it's kind of like a separation. And I'll have another for loop. This time I'll use D as my counter variable for D in range. And this time I'm going to count down. So I want to start at the number 60. I want to stop when I reach the number 3. And in order to do that, because see, by default, the for loop will count up by 1. If you want it to count up by a different constant, you can put that as the third parameter. So I'm going to put -1 as the third parameter, and that's optional. In this case, because you're counting down, you do have to put a negative number in the third one, or it won't count down. And then we just could put print D. So when we run this program, if I go up to in my terminal, I'm going to actually make this window bigger so you can see more of it. So I've run the program, and you can see where the stars started. It starts at 60, then it prints 59, 58. Keep in mind the variable D is changing every time that it loops around, and it's showing the result on the screen, and it goes all the way down to 4. When it reaches 3, it breaks. So as soon as it reaches the stop condition, when D is equal to 3, it breaks. So the for loop is a lot more streamlined than the while loop, and it has a more specific purpose, I guess. And it's good for counting with integers. You can use it for decimal numbers as well, but it's not very common. I think the first time that I saw a decimal number used in a for loop was later on in my university career, and I thought it was kind of a strange use for it, but it can definitely be used. And actually, you can count up by fractions of a number. So you can do like 0.2 or 0.5 if you want, but we're not going to do that right now. How about you can change the variable by any value at the end of each loop. So I'm going to show you. So here's a comment here. Counting up by ones by default is by default. And then for D, we have you can also count down if you use the optional third parameter. And then I have a comment here. It says, for my third example, you can change the variable by any value at the end of each loop. And that's just using the third parameter. Optional third parameter. So here's another for loop for I in range. So my counter variable is now I, starting at 0, going up to 63 for some reason, and it's counting up by 5s. Now, you might think 63 does not divide evenly into 5, and you're correct. So let's see what it does. Print I. So when we run it, the last value that we get is 4. Oops, sorry. No, I didn't. No, that's not. Let's run it and then see what we get. So the last value that I get is 60. So it starts at 0. It starts counting up by 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. Now when it gets to 63, it doesn't get 63, does it? It gets to 65 because it's adding 5 each time. So after it gets to 60, it prints 60. It loops back around. It increments I to 65, and it does the comparison. It says, well, 65 is greater than what we're allowed to go up to. We're only allowed to go up to 63, so break or exit. So the for loop will exit then. Okay, so note, and this is in the document. I'm just going to go back to my browser window so you can see that. And this document is available to you. So note, the third parameter specifies how the variable changes at the end of each loop. And also note that the for loop stops looping before it reaches the second parameter. Okay, as soon as it reaches that second parameter, it terminates it right away. The next thing I wanted to go over is rounding numbers, and that's going to be done in another video. I'll choose to do 3 short videos or 2 short videos here. So rounding and randoms will be in another video.